She went looking for a breakthrough in her biggest case. Instead, she walked straight into a bloodbath, and the man she had exposed was the one who pulled her out. Sloan Voss had built a career doing what most people were too scared to do. She said dangerous men's names out loud, not in whispers, not behind anonymous posts, not through vague headlines that danced around the truth and then called it journalism. Sloan had a voice people trusted, a true crime podcast with a cult following, the kind of platform where listeners stayed up too late, headphones on, waiting for her to take apart another story piece by piece until the monster in the middle of it had nowhere left to hide. And her newest target was the biggest one yet, Roman Vetrano, a reclusive mafia boss tied to old money, organized crime, missing witnesses, political corruption, and one massacre that had been buried so deeply under silence and fear that most people had stopped asking what really happened that night. But Sloan hadn't stopped asking. In fact, she had built an entire season around him. And once she started, the whole thing exploded. Her listeners were obsessed. The clips were everywhere. People were sharing her episodes, arguing over her theories, calling her brave, reckless, brilliant, unhinged, sometimes all at once. Because Sloan didn't just report on Roman Vetrano. She called him what no one else dared to call him in public, a monster. And the scariest part? She made it sound convincing. She sat in that recording booth, calm as ever, speaking into her microphone with that cool, cutting voice of hers, telling the world that Roman Vetrano wasn't just a rumor or a myth built out of old fear. He was real. A man whose name floated around extortion, bloodshed, vanished people, and ruined investigations. A man who had somehow stayed just far enough from the spotlight to remain untouchable while his shadow kept showing up everywhere. That power and violence overlapped. Sloan knew how to build a story. She knew how to guide people through darkness and make them feel like they were discovering the truth right alongside her. And this time, she believed she had him. She believed Roman Vetrano was the center of everything. Then the messages started. Some were normal for her line of work. Threats, warnings, weird anonymous comments from people who thought a profile picture and a private account made them terrifying. But one source was different. He called himself Argus. He didn't come to her with wild conspiracy theories or dramatic claims that fell apart after 2 searches. He came with records, real details, missing documents, contradictions buried deep inside official timelines. Enough truth to make Sloan trust him, and the deeper she went, the more valuable he seemed. He became the voice in the dark, leading her toward the biggest break in the story. So when a fresh message came in one evening, with what looked like a direct lead tied to the massacre at the center of Roman's history, Sloan didn't hesitate for long. She should have. Her producer, Naomi, felt it immediately. Something was wrong. The timing was too neat. The lead was too perfect. The whole case had started moving with a speed that made it feel less like discovery and more like direction. But Sloan had that fatal kind of confidence that comes with being right too many times in a row. She thought she was walking into the next great reveal. Instead, she walked into a trap. The location was wrong from the second she got there. Too quiet, too empty, too still. It was one of those places where your body realizes the danger before your mind catches up. An underground concrete structure near the docks. No movement, no noise. Just that awful kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for someone to step into it. And Sloan did. Then the men came out. Not one, not 2. Enough. Armed, calm. Positioned too perfectly for this to be random. She didn't even have time to fully process what was happening before the panic hit. That sharp, body-level panic where nothing feels real because everything is moving too fast. She tried to back away, tried to ask questions, tried to make sense of the fact that this wasn't a lead. It was an ambush. And just when it looked like there was nowhere left to run, gunfire exploded through the dark. Not from the men closing in on her, from somewhere else. One of them dropped, then another. Chaos ripped the whole scene open. Sloan hit the ground on instinct, scrambling behind the nearest cover while shouting, "Footsteps!" and "Bullets!" And then she saw him, Roman Vetrano. He did not appear like a hero. He appeared like judgment, cold, controlled, efficient. The kind of man who didn't waste movement, didn't waste words, and definitely didn't waste bullets. Sloan had spent weeks building a version of him in her mind through records, rumors, theories, and carefully narrated episodes. But none of that prepared her for the reality of him, because the man she had called a monster on air moved through that bloodbath like he belonged there, terrifying in a way that made panic feel useless. He killed the men trying to take her and reached her before she could even figure out whether she should fear him more than the ones already dead on the floor. And then, with blood on his hands and the whole place still echoing from violence, he grabbed her and gave her the kind of choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Come with me and live. Or stay here and hope help gets to you before someone else does. That was the moment Sloan's story stopped being a podcast season and became something far more dangerous. Because Roman didn't call the police. He didn't explain himself. He took her straight out of the wreckage and into a waiting SUV while the adrenaline still hadn't worn off, and her mind was still trying to catch up with the fact that the man she had publicly dissected for weeks was now the one dragging her to safety. If safety was even the right word. The drive was a blur of rage, shock, and too many questions. Sloan demanded answers. Roman gave her almost none, only enough to make things worse. He told her she had become useful to his enemies, that by making him the center of her viral investigation, she had put herself directly in the path of people who wanted to use her voice for something bigger than she understood. And then he said something that truly unsettled her. Not because it was threatening, because it was personal. He knew things about her work, not general things, specific things, her structure and habits, the way she built episodes, the way she chose which details to lean on and which ones to save for later. At first, Sloan thought he had maybe heard an episode or two. Then she realized the truth. Roman Vetrano had been listening closely. By the time they arrived at the villa, Sloan was angry enough to burn and shaken enough to know she was in real danger. And the villa itself did not help. It was beautiful in the worst possible way. Remote, cliffside, all stone and silence and expensive control. The kind of place where every hallway looked polished and every locked door felt intentional. Less like a home and more like a world built around one man's rules. She was taken inside. Her phone, recorder, and laptop were confiscated. Every tool she used to gather information, hold control, or shape a story. One by one, all of it disappeared from her hands, and that was when it started to feel real. The stripping away of her voice in physical form. Roman told her she would be staying in his wing of the house, supposedly for security, because he didn't trust anyone else around her, which somehow made the whole thing even more claustrophobic, not less. There was a housekeeper named Signora Bellini, who seemed impossible to shock. A right-hand man named Carlos, who looked at Sloan like she was either a security threat or an incoming migraine. And Roman, always Roman, moving through the house like the walls themselves took instruction from him. The next morning, Sloan did what she always did when cornered. She started studying him back. At breakfast, she tried to provoke him by slipping into that cool, on-air voice of hers. The same one she used when she wanted to peel a subject open with elegance instead of volume. She asked pointed questions. She tested his reactions. Tried to remind herself that whatever else he was still just a man. Roman didn't take the bait. Worse, he answered some of her questions just enough to prove he wasn't rattled. And then he said something that made her blood go cold. He quoted one of her own episodes back to her. Not vaguely. Exactly. As if he had memorized the line. That was the moment Sloan understood she had made a very serious mistake. This was not a man who had accidentally heard the noise around his name. This was a man who knew her voice. Later, when she was alone, Sloan did what any woman in that situation would do if she still had any instinct for survival mixed with self-destruction. She snooped. She mapped the hallways, noticed the cameras, counted the doors, tracked who moved where and when. And eventually, that led her into one of the rooms Roman clearly did not expect her to understand so quickly. His study. At first, nothing looked unusual. Shelves, files, order, silence. Then Sloan saw the papers spread across the table. Printed transcripts of her podcast episodes. Every accusation, every theory, every line she had used to cut Roman Vetrano open in public. Marked up, corrected, underlined in his handwriting. He hadn't just listened to her, he had been studying her. And outside the walls of that isolated villa, the panic was already starting. Her producer knew something was wrong. Her audience was beginning to notice her silence. The woman who had built a career, telling the world where danger lived, had vanished without a trace. But the most terrifying part wasn't that Sloan had gone missing. It was the truth settling in as she stared at those pages. She had spent weeks speaking about Roman Vetrano like she understood him. And now, trapped inside his house, Sloan realized she knew nothing about the monster she had made famous. Read the full story on our website, amplereads.com, to find out what happens next.